On the day they dragged the CEO out in handcuffs, no one paid attention to the woman mopping the marble lobby. They never had. Joyce had been there for 15 years. No title, no desk, no upward mobility. Just the keys on her hip and the mop in her hand. She moved silently through the corridors of power, the human equivalent of background noise. Executives brushed past her mid-phone call, interns laughed at her accent, and HR ignored her safety complaints like clockwork. She was invisible. And that was exactly how she liked it. The mockery was constant, though mostly behind her back. "Can't believe she still wears those nurse shoes," muttered one middle manager. "Think she's spying for someone? Who even needs a night cleaner anymore?" asked another. The new hires giggled, the old ones rolled their eyes. She never reacted. Never replied. She just listened. Because when people don't see you, they forget to hide their secret. Joyce knew every pattern. She knew who left the office early before big deadlines, who wiped their screens when she walked in, who whispered hush-hush in the supply closet. She knew whose bonus came from someone else's overtime, and which executives practiced their diversity speeches in the mirror before firing a whole floor of immigrant contractors. She saw it all. She cleaned it all. In the penthouse boardroom, they called her the late-night roach, thinking she couldn't hear. But the walls in that room weren't as soundproof as the architect claimed. That night, the CEO had joked, "If she ever sues, we'll just throw a diversity award at her. She'll be happy with a plaque." Laughter followed. One of them even clapped. Joyce bent down to pick up a sugar packet that had missed the trash. As she did, her eyes drifted to the USB drive someone had dropped near the outlet. White label. No markings. She slipped it into her mop bucket like lint. By morning, she had copied its content. And unlike those Ivy League execs, she actually read it all. The cleaning locker was small, barely more than a closet, but Joyce had made it a command center. A hidden shelf behind the bleach bottles held a refurbished laptop her nephew had salvaged from a pawn shop. The Wi-Fi? She'd gotten the password when IT forgot to log out one night. She learned quickly, browsed quietly, documented methodically. Years of emails, documents, internal memos, all indexed, labeled, stored. Digital dustbins full of gold. Each insult fueled her fire. One manager accused her of stealing breakroom snack. She smiled and restocked the vending machine, then flagged the same manager in her files for nepotism. Another VP threatened to speak to her supervisor after slipping on his own spilled coffee. She filed a quiet report with a time-stamped photo. He laughed when HR dismissed it. She did not. It wasn't rage that kept her going. It was precision. The kind you only gain after years of scrubbing someone else's mess. You start to notice patterns. Who tracks dirt in, who hides it under rugs, who pretends it was never there. Joyce didn't just clean floors. She cleaned systems. She had a mental map of the entire building, where cameras faced, where the mics didn't pick up sound, where phones lost signal. No one taught her that. She just paid attention. While executives wasted time in pointless synergy meetings, she sharpened her understanding of every inch of terrain. Their battlefield was buzzwords. Hers was leverage. In break rooms, she watched employees vent. Some cried. Others plotted. A few just gave up. She always nodded politely, never intruded. But she remembered. When a young receptionist was quietly let go after rejecting the VP's advances, Joyce brought her tissues. And she wrote down the date, time, and hallway camera number. She didn't know what she was building at first. Just a pile of grievances. A quiet monument to corporate rot. But it grew. And the more it grew, the more she saw the pattern. This wasn't just a bad boss or one corrupt executive. It was the system itself. Polished on the outside, rotting from within. Still, she waited. She watched board members host forced smiles during Diversity and Inclusion Day, then laugh about quotas in the elevator. She scrubbed conference tables where women weren't invited to sit. She picked up brochures that bragged about ethical supply chains, right after the factory layoff. They mocked her accent, her uniform, her age, her skin. She was the joke. Until she wasn't. One night, past midnight, she stood outside the CEO's office while he yelled on the phone. "I don't care who gets hurt, bury it. Fire the whole floor if you need to." A pause. "And get rid of that nosy janitor if she keeps snooping." Another pause. "I don't know her name. Just make her disappear." Joyce smiled. He didn't know her name. But soon, everyone would. The next day, she cleaned the boardroom as usual. Polished the chairs, wiped the glass, disinfected the speakerphone. Then, just before she left, she placed a small envelope under the central chair. Inside, a single photograph of the CEO's off-the-books payout to an ex-employee, redacted names, date and time, and a QR code that led to a drive full of documents. A quiet invitation. That night, someone accessed the folder. She knew because she received an alert on her nephew's server. 10 minutes later, another file was added. A whistleblower form. Anonymous. Joyce hadn't submitted it. But someone else did. Someone with a conscience or a fear of being next. It had begun. Joyce locked her mop away like a weapon placed in its sheath. She walked out without a sound, as invisible as she'd always been. But no war starts with a speech. Some start with a clean floor. They called it corporate housekeeping in the executive emails, code for quietly moving money, hiding lawsuits, and replacing problems with silence. Joyce had read every line. She had proof. What began as passive observation had evolved into strategic data collection. She wasn't just cleaning the building anymore, she was auditing it. Each room she entered became a potential crime scene. Not with blood, but with betrayal, against employees, clients, and decency itself. The files were damning. One contained evidence that a board member had funneled contracts to a shell company registered under his cousin's name. Another outlined how HR manipulated diversity statistics by hiring minorities for temporary roles and then terminating them before benefits kicked in. There was an unspoken policy against promoting anyone who didn't reflect the brand. The code? No accents, no afros, no aging women. Joyce documented it all. Screenshot, photos, time-stamped security clip, voice memos slipped into her pocket while she swept behind closed doors. It wasn't vengeance. It was order. The kind the company claimed to value but never practiced. She didn't act alone anymore. The young intern she had quietly mentored, Devon, was sharp, observant, and just as invisible as she once was. Black, soft-spoken, non-binary, and perpetually underestimated, Devon moved through the system like vapor. No one noticed them in meetings unless coffee was needed. Joyce had spotted their potential early. A sideways glance during a particularly condescending manager's speech, a clenched jaw during a diversity workshop that offered free donuts but no policy change. She handed Devon a folder one evening with no explanation. Inside were photos of an executive altering payroll data. They met weekly in the janitor's closet, surrounded by pine-scented camouflage. Devon brought technical skills. Joyce brought institutional memory. Together, they began to build a timeline of corruption. Devon was hesitant at first. "What are we doing? This isn't going to change anything." Joyce never smiled much, but then she did. "It will. If we don't give them a fire, we give them mold. Something that spreads." One particularly damning file showed the abrupt firing of an entire group of Nigerian data analysts. Official reason: budget cuts. The real reason, hidden in email threads, was that a board member felt their names were too complicated and intimidating for clients. Devon had wanted to throw the laptop. Joyce just saved the files. She taught them patience, strategy, the art of not reacting. Let the enemy feel safe. Let them continue. Let them sign their own confession. In the cafeteria, they overheard a conversation about Joyce herself. A mid-level manager joked, "She's like part of the furniture. Bet she'll still be here when the building collapses." Devon's eyes flashed. Joyce just poured more coffee. "They notice furniture when it's missing," she said. They weren't just collecting dirt. They were creating a pattern, One that showed the company didn't just have isolated problems, but a systemic rot. One board member offered campaign donations in exchange for local zoning laws favoring expansion. Another diverted pension funds to pay off personal debt. All hidden beneath polished logos and glossy ad campaigns. Joyce knew timing was everything. Too soon and they'd adapt. Too late and they'd bury it deeper. So they chose to start small. A targeted leak about one executive's sexual harassment history. The man had quietly settled 2 cases, and HR had lost the paperwork. Devon made sure it got found by the press. The response was swift. Internal emails flew. Damage control protocols activated. The executive resigned for health reasons. But the real damage was elsewhere. People inside the company started whispering. Someone was watching. Someone knew. Employees dug through old files, revisited ignored reports, compared notes. And in those whispers, Joyce heard the first signs of movement. Awareness, fear, change. Some were scared. Others felt vindicated. A few began asking questions out loud. Why are there no black women in management? Why does every layoff hit immigrants hardest? Why is our ethics officer also head of investor relations? Devon created a secure inbox under a fake name, Cleanhouse at ProtonMail. Submissions flooded in. Anonymous accounts of abuse, discrimination, exploitation. Janitors paid less than minimum wage. Latina temps fired after getting pregnant. Promotions given to friends, not performers. Joyce read them all. Each message was fuel. Not for rage, but for resolution. She prepared Phase 2. At the quarterly town hall, the CEO paraded a slideshow about corporate social responsibility. Smiling faces, buzzwords, stock images of handshakes and diversity group. Behind the scenes, Devon pushed a timed upload to a private server, every document, memo, and email they had gathered. Access was limited. 1 link per IP. No downloads, but enough to prove the truth to those who needed to see it. Department heads, journalists, a few quiet allies on the board. Not everyone was corrupt. Some were just too scared to act alone. Within 48 hours, 3 anonymous complaints reached Federal Labor Board. 2 investors pulled funding, pending review of internal compliance issues. The company issued a generic statement. We are aware of anonymous allegations and take all matters seriously. They weren't ready. Joyce and Devon had only used 10% of the files. The company scrambled. Emergency meetings were held. Consultants brought in. PR spun the situation as miscommunication. But they were bleeding reputation, morale, money. And they didn't know where the leak was coming from. They blamed middle managers. They blamed the IT department. No one suspected the cleaning lady and the intern. Joyce kept her mop steady. Every night she passed the framed values statement in the lobby: integrity, innovation, inclusion. She cleaned the glass until her reflection shone back. Then she walked away, leaving fingerprints on the frame. Evidence that she had been there, that she was watching, that this house wasn't clean yet. The company had always underestimated her. Her silence, her skin, her job title, her uniform. Now they were playing defense, and Joyce hadn't even started pushing yet. The boardroom was in chaos. Whisper networks turned into shouting matches. Loyalty cracked along fault lines no one had noticed before. Everyone was watching their back, except the one person who never had to. Joyce never changed her routine. Same shoes, same uniform, same quiet step. But now, when she passed people in the hall, they looked twice. Not because they suspected her, but because they were nervous about who might be listening. Fear makes people sloppy. Sloppy people make mistakes. Joyce watched. Devon, meanwhile, planted the seeds of Phase 3. It was no longer enough to expose the rot. Now they had to replace it. The problem wasn't just the executives. It was the system that let them thrive. If one corrupt leader resigned, another would take their place unless the rules themselves changed. The cleaning records were the perfect cover. Joyce had logged every broken light, every wet floor, every ignored maintenance ticket. But quietly, she also documented non-compliance issues. Fire hazards, OSHA violations, accessibility failures, even biohazards ignored in the lab sector. She built a report, factual, emotionless, undeniable. Devon embedded the violations into a whistleblower letter addressed to the city inspector's office. Not from them. From a fictional employee, T.J. Ramos, junior maintenance coordinator. Background fabricated. ID scrubbed clean. But the letter? Bulletproof. Within 2 weeks, city inspectors showed up unannounced. Fire exits blocked by boxes. Emergency lighting systems disabled. A half-installed sprinkler system in the east wing. Fines were issued. Meetings cancelled. Suddenly, cleaning staff became visible again. Managers barked fake orders to show they cared. But Joyce didn't flinch. She knew it was temporary. The HR department launched a full audit. To reinforce transparency, they said. In reality, it was a witch hunt. Who was leaking? Who had the documents? Laptops were checked. Phones scanned. But they never checked the janitor's closet, where the real servers were hidden behind a false wall of paper towels. One morning, Devon showed Joyce the updated org chart. 5 upper-level roles marked interim. 3 VPs gone. The ethics chief, silently reassigned. No public explanation. Just voids where titles used to be. Power was shifting. Not falling. Shifting. They weren't aiming for collapse. That was the company's own doing. Joyce's mission was precision. She didn't want to destroy the building, she wanted to fumigate it. Drive out the pest. Reinforce the beams. Let new things grow. So she began recommending people. Quietly. Strategically. A young black woman in logistics. Smart, ethical, always ignored in meetings. Received an anonymous tip to apply for the interim procurement director role. A disabled vet from the maintenance crew with a degree in project management? Pushed for promotion with a portfolio that mysteriously landed on the right desk. Joyce never signed her name. She didn't have to. The staff began to feel the difference. Rules enforced fairly. Overtime compensated. Training sessions that weren't just compliance theater. For the first time, employees whispered about something new. Hope. That's when the retaliation came. Someone vandalized Joyce's locker. Rat scrawled in red marker. Her mop snapped in half. Her shoes stolen. It wasn't just a message, it was a warning. They were getting close. She didn't react. Just borrowed a spare mop and kept cleaning. But Devon was furious. We can't just let this slide. We go public. Joyce shook her head. No. That's what they want. To shift the story. To make it about me. It's not. It's about the system. They pivoted. Phase 4. The company had recently launched a new mentorship initiative, on paper. In practice, it was just optics. But Joyce turned it into a weapon. She pushed for real mentorship. Not with slogans, but with result. She submitted recommendations through anonymous HR forms. Suggested partnerships between marginalized junior staff and surviving ethical seniors. Quietly, the matches happened. New ideas emerged. Silos broke down. Change was no longer a threat. It was starting to feel like an opportunity. The CEO, now visibly cornered, made a move. He fired 3 cleaning staff on performance grounds, including Joyce. No warning. No hearing. Just a typed letter and a security escort. The escort never arrived. Because someone in HR, someone she'd helped once, someone who'd been passed over for promotions twice, flagged the action. Improper termination protocol. No evidence. No witnesses. They filed an internal grievance with the board. Joyce was reinstated the next morning with back pay. The CEO exploded. He stormed into the boardroom, demanding names, demanding control. But he didn't realize, he no longer had it. One of the board members handed him a folder, everything Joyce and Devon had gathered. Not anonymously this time. Inside was a letter, printed on plain paper. You built your throne on silence. But we speak now. You built your brand on mask. But we clean mirrors. The board called for a vote. Unanimous. The CEO was removed. Officially? Retirement. Privately? Disgrace. Joyce received no public credit. No promotion. No headline. But the next morning, the new interim CEO, a Latina woman from compliance, walked into the building and held the door open for Joyce. "Thank you," she said. Joyce nodded. By week's end, the cleaning closet had a new sign, Facilities Command Center. Joyce didn't smile. But Devon did, and that was enough. The system hadn't just been cleaned. It had been redesigned. The new leadership didn't ask Joyce to take off her uniform. That was the first sign things might actually change. The second came when they handed her a keycard labeled All Access. No speech. No ceremony. Just trust. She didn't need a desk. Her office had always been the building itself. Most of the employees didn't know her name. They knew her presence. They remembered how she'd been there when no one else noticed the mold in the ceiling, the frayed cords under the cubicles, the broken heater that management ignored for months. Now, when she passed, people made space. Not out of fear, but respect. She kept cleaning. It wasn't a statement. It was a truth. She wasn't there for optics. She was there to work. But her work had evolved. Joyce began holding 5-minute meetings with employees in the break room. Never on the calendar, always at the right time. A nod to someone who looked too exhausted. A quiet check-in with the new receptionist, barely 18, who had been crying in the elevator. Joyce listened. She wrote nothing down. But she remembered everything. Devon, now in a legitimate analyst role, created a new kind of internal metric system. Not one based on quarterly revenue or superficial diversity stats, but on turnover stability, peer mentorships, complaint resolution times. Real data that showed whether people felt safe, heard, and valued. Joyce gave input on every category. They called the new system workplace wellness, but it wasn't wellness in the yoga and fruit sense. It was built on fairness, consequences, and transparency. An old manager, one of the few who had survived the purge, called it too idealistic. Joyce told him, "Clean floors don't stay clean. You mop every day." His position was quietly phased out. The remaining leadership began leaning on her for insight. Who was creating tension? Who was holding the team together? She didn't give names unless it was necessary. She wasn't building power to punish. She was building pathways for others to rise. One of those was Tamika, the cafeteria server. Joyce had watched her navigate toxic supervisors for 3 years without ever losing her poise. Now, she was promoted to lead nutrition coordinator. Her first action? A food stipend for late shift workers who often skipped meals to meet deadlines. Joyce observed everything. Patterns of burnout. Subtle microaggressions still lingering in marketing. The quiet exclusion of people with disabilities from company events. She addressed each without fanfare. She called it course correction. Others called it a miracle. The whispers began again. Not of sabotage, but of legacy. People said she was the heart of the building. She ignored the sentiment. She preferred action. She suggested policy revisions. A proper whistleblower structure, finally ratified. Clear channels for filing discrimination complaints, with a third-party review panel. An apprenticeship initiative for high school students from underserved communities. Mentorship tracks for single parents. Paid family leave beyond the minimum. Each change took negotiation, time, sometimes quiet confrontation. She didn't argue. She presented evidence. She had mastered the art of truth so undeniable, it didn't need emotion to carry it. One executive pushed back against hiring formerly incarcerated applicants. Joyce asked him to name a single security incident from applicants with that background in the last 5 years. He couldn't. She then named 2 former janitors, both now in stable careers, who had quietly saved the company thousands in emergency response costs by being the only ones calm under pressure during an evacuation drill. Policy changed the next day. It wasn't about charity. It was about clarity. The company started getting attention, not from tabloids but from industry peers. A former toxic culture case study had become a rising example in ethical corporate transformation. Other firms requested interviews with the new executive team. Joyce declined all media appearances. Devon asked her why. Because if I talk, they'll focus on me, not the system. She was mentoring others now. A young Muslim woman in accounting, a Filipino trans man in HR, a white Appalachian coder with dyslexia who had nearly quit twice before someone finally adjusted the font size on his monitor. She wasn't creating heroes. She was normalizing dignity. People stopped laughing when she entered rooms. They stood up straighter. They listened. Not because she demanded it, but because they'd seen what happened when they didn't. The final shift came without an announcement. The company rewrote its official organizational chart. A new department appeared, Integrity Operations. Joyce's name wasn't on the website, but everyone knew who ran it. Her budget was modest. Her reach was total. She never threatened anyone. She never needed to. Her presence alone reminded them, the walls have memory. When a new intern mocked the custodial staff during orientation, he was reassigned to janitorial support for 2 weeks. No formal punishment, just exposure. He learned the difference between surface clean and deep clean, between mess and neglect. On his last day, he apologized to Joyce. She nodded once. Don't apologize. Just remember who cleans up after you. He did. People began leaving her small note. Not gift. Note. Thank yous. Memories. A drawing from an employee's child who remembered Joyce handing out granola bars during a fire drill. A sticky note from an engineer who said her advice helped him finally ask for a raise. She kept them in a box labeled receipts. Not for revenge. For remembrance. The company had changed. Not because it wanted to, but because one woman with a mop refused to ignore the dirt everyone else pretended wasn't there. And now they were finally starting to see what clean really meant. Joyce never celebrated milestones. Not when the CEO was removed. Not when policy reforms were signed. Not when her unofficial role became something whispered about in executive halls. She was never interested in applause. She was interested in impact. So when the 5-year strategic report came out with a dramatic improvement in retention, productivity, and equity metrics, she read it once, nodded, and went back to work. But she knew a storm was brewing. Old systems don't die without throwing one last punch. The company's largest investor, a legacy shareholder with ties to the previous leadership, requested a leadership performance audit. It was code. They wanted an excuse to shake the table, reassert control, maybe even oust the new structure if it seemed too radical. The board hesitated. Some newer members, still unsure of how Joyce wielded so much informal influence, considered complying. Devon intercepted the first memo, read it 3 times, then took it straight to Joyce. She read it silently and said only, "It's time." She didn't launch a campaign. She made a list. It started with the numbers. Profit margins, employee growth, customer satisfaction, all drastically improved since the structural overhaul. She linked those numbers to specific changes. Better hiring practices, mentorship programs, accountability audit. Not with flair, but with footnotes. Then she moved on to testimonies. Anonymous, unedited, raw. Staff from every department, from cleaning to C-suite, spoke on how the cultural shift had affected them personally. The final piece was a video. Just under 3 minutes. No music. Just employees speaking candidly. A maintenance worker describing how his autistic son was now on track to intern in the summer. A single mom who'd never thought she could move up in tech, now mentoring 3 others. A middle-aged accountant in a wheelchair finally able to attend meetings in accessible rooms. Joyce never appeared in the footage. The board reviewed the materials the night before the audit. The investor arrived with a polished legal team, expecting weakness. What he found was precision. He was walked through the 5-year transformation with metrics sharper than any financial summary he'd seen. Not projections, proof. He still tried to undermine it. He asked who exactly was running the show. The executive team? The diversity hires? The janitor? Joyce looked him straight in the eye and said, "Nobody's running the show. We're maintaining it. That's how systems last." The silence after that sentence was thick enough to mop. The audit team submitted a neutral report. No action needed. The board, emboldened by the preparation and the staff's visible support, voted to move the investor to an observer seat. Influence removed. Power preserved. Afterwards, Devon leaned over and said, "You didn't just beat him. You taught him." Joyce replied, "He won't learn." But someone else in the room did. With the immediate threat gone, attention turned outward. Other companies began adopting fragments of their internal reforms. HR professionals sought mentorship. Community leaders asked for workshop. Universities requested guest lectures. Joyce refused all of them. She sent Devon to speak. Not because she didn't have the words, but because she knew what mattered most wasn't being seen. It was building others who could be. She launched a silent initiative, Legacy Route. No press, no website. Just a network of former custodial staff, cafeteria workers, night guards, all now in mid or senior level positions, sharing their knowledge with others in the shadows of the system. The slogan was simple: "You already know how to clean. Now learn how to build." It spread faster than anyone expected. An ex-security guard turned data analyst taught resilient strategies to gig workers trying to transition into tech. A former lunchroom cashier ran training programs on negotiation tactics for women in blue-collar roles. Joyce connected them all, but she never led them. She refused to become a figurehead. She stayed the anchor, not the sail. That's when the article came out. An investigative journalist published a glowing exposé about the mysterious cultural revolution inside one of the most toxic corporations in the city. It didn't name her. It called her the Phantom Executive, described only in terms of presence, not position. Some believed the article exaggerated. Others whispered about secret leadership cells. Theories bloomed. Joyce ignored it. She told Devon, "Truth without evidence is gossip. Let them guess. We've got real things to fix." But something shifted after that article. Staff began acting differently, not out of fear or reverence, but pride. They wanted to be part of something bigger. So Joyce gave them that chance. She helped design a mentorship pipeline that paired each new hire with someone from a different background, department, or cultural experience. Not for compliance. For learning. Real relationships formed. Empathy became structural, not performative. She commissioned audits not of finances, but of stories. Monthly story circles were held. No hierarchy, no agenda, just staff from all levels telling their truth. Patterns emerged. Where dignity was rising, where gaps still lingered. Those patterns informed policy, not empty slogans. And for the first time, the company released a report titled Lessons from the Bottom Floor. It wasn't a diversity report. It was a guide to rebuilding broken cultures, written by those who had once been invisible. The industry called it revolutionary. Joyce called it overdue. One morning, while refilling soap dispensers in the third-floor bathrooms, a young intern asked her if it was true. Had she really taken down the whole board with just a mop? She looked at him, then said, "No. I took down the lie that they were untouchable." He smiled. "I want to be like you." Joyce didn't smile back. She just said, "Be better. And don't forget to hold the door for whoever's mopping behind you." Because power wasn't the goal. And she wasn't the hero. She was the reminder that the smallest person in the room is often the only one who sees the mess everyone else steps over. And if that person is willing to pick up the mop, not just to clean, but to lead, then they can do more than shine a floor. They can rebuild a world. The transformation wasn't linear. There were setbacks, resistance, and moments when even Joyce questioned the weight of the fight. But resilience was the currency she had traded in long before the corporate world noticed. It showed up in small victories. A respectful nod in the hallway, a policy passed quietly, a complaint resolved without retaliation. Her leadership was a quiet force, not loud or flashy. She led by example, not decree. When a new diversity officer suggested a public relations campaign featuring her as a symbol of change, she declined. "Change isn't a mascot," she said. "It's a movement." The company's culture evolved from one of fear and silence to one of accountability and growth. Discrimination was no longer a whispered secret but a named enemy. Employees were encouraged to speak up, not just for themselves but for each other. This advocacy created ripples, shifting power dynamics across departments. Joyce personally mentored dozens, focusing on growth beyond titles and paycheck. She taught them to see value in their voices, to demand equality, and to forgive, not as a way to forget injustice, but as a step toward collective healing. She believed forgiveness was strength, not weakness, and that it allowed the community to move forward without carrying poison. The impact was tangible. Employee turnover dropped sharply. Productivity rose. But more importantly, workplace interactions changed. Microaggressions were called out, biases acknowledged, and inclusion became a practiced norm. The workforce was diverse not just in race and gender but in thought and experience. Yet, the work wasn't done. Joyce understood transformation was ongoing. Systems needed constant attention, like a garden tended to prevent weeds from overtaking. She established a continuous feedback loop where employees could anonymously share concerns or ideas, ensuring that leadership never again grew complacent. She also initiated cross-department mentorship programs, breaking silos that had fostered prejudice and misunderstanding. These connections nurtured empathy, allowing employees to see colleagues beyond their job titles or backgrounds, fostering a culture of genuine respect and collaboration. Legacy was central to Joyce's vision. She didn't just want to change one company but to inspire systemic change. Through quiet advocacy, she collaborated with community leaders and nonprofits to create training programs for marginalized groups, preparing them to enter and succeed in corporate environments. Her influence reached beyond the building. Local universities invited her to speak about leadership rooted in resilience and inclusion. She insisted on sharing the spotlight with those she had mentored, believing that true leadership empowered others to lead. Despite the growing recognition, Joyce remained grounded. She never sought fame or power but measured success by the growth of those around her. The cleaning lady who once faced mockery now symbolized a shift in how corporations could function, with integrity, empathy, and accountability at their core. When asked about her journey, Joyce often said, "I didn't do this alone. It took all of us to clean the mess. And it will take all of us to keep it clean." Her story was a testament to the power of resilience, leadership, and the courage to challenge systemic prejudice. It was a reminder that transformation begins when someone refuses to be invisible and uses their position, no matter how humble, to demand justice and inspire change. In the end, Joyce's legacy wasn't just about firing a boss or climbing rank. It was about creating a culture where everyone had the opportunity to grow, belong, and lead. Where diversity and inclusion were woven into the fabric of daily work, not just written in policy. She left behind a company, and a community, forever changed, proving that real power lies not in titles, but in the strength to stand up, the wisdom to listen, and the grace to lift others along the way. The final chapter wasn't about triumph, but transformation, and the true cost of change. Joyce understood better than anyone that systems could be resilient not just in success, but in their ability to resist and adapt to pressure. After the initial victories, a quieter battle began, one that demanded vigilance, humility, and continuous leadership. Some longtime employees, still clinging to old biases, tried to undermine the new culture in subtle ways. They dismissed mentorships as weakness, diversity initiatives as tokenism, and accountability measures as witch hunts. Joyce faced these challenges with the same steady calm she'd always had, but now her authority was undeniable, built on years of consistency and evidence. She emphasized that growth wasn't about erasing history, but about owning it. That meant acknowledging painful truths, the legacy of discrimination, missed opportunities, and silent complicity. To truly move forward, the company needed to hold space for both apology and action. Joyce initiated an annual reflection and renewal day, where all employees participated in open forums, anonymous surveys, and storytelling sessions. This became a ritual not of blame, but of collective learning. It was uncomfortable. It was necessary. It reminded everyone that transformation is an ongoing commitment, not a final destination. Forgiveness, she taught, was not forgetting mistakes, but dismantling the barriers they created. It allowed the company to heal wounds that had festered for decades and to build a foundation where diversity and inclusion were intrinsic, not performative. As the company expanded this ethos outward, clients and partners took notice. Contracts with organizations that championed equity increased, and the company became a preferred employer in a competitive market. This shift was not accidental. It was a direct result of creating a workplace where people felt valued and empowered. Joyce's mentorship network blossomed into an incubator for future leaders. Many who had started as custodial staff, cafeteria workers, or interns moved into executive roles elsewhere, spreading the principles of equity and accountability into new environments. This ripple effect was perhaps her most enduring legacy. Yet, Joyce remained vigilant against complacency. She knew systems could regress if vigilance waned. She encouraged continuous learning, frequent self-assessment, and fostering empathy at all levels. Power, she believed, should be a shared responsibility, a tool for uplifting rather than controlling. Her impact was visible not only in policies and numbers but in daily interactions. Respectful conversations replacing whispered criticisms, collaborative problem-solving over blame games, and a culture where every person's voice mattered. When Joyce finally retired, there was no grand farewell. She left quietly, handing over the keys not to a successor, but to a collective leadership committee formed from diverse voices across the company. She trusted that the culture she nurtured would survive not because of one person, but because it belonged to everyone. Her story, once a quiet rebellion behind mops and cleaning carts, became a blueprint for systemic change. It showed that resilience, leadership, and transformation are not reserved for those in traditional positions of power. Sometimes they come from the ones overlooked, underestimated, or mocked. Joyce proved that legacy is not about the titles held or battles won, but about the doors opened for others to walk through. She turned a hostile workplace into a home where equity, empathy, and growth were the new norm. And in doing so, she redefined what it means to lead with quiet strength, unwavering integrity, and a vision for a better, more inclusive world. Her journey reminds us all: the smallest voice, armed with determination and clarity, can echo louder than the loudest crowd. And sometimes, the mop isn't just a tool to clean, it's a symbol of the power to transform.